in so many cases, when it comes to strategic thinking and, sort of what the success is that we are all collectively aspiring toward, the common narrative is actually not helpful and possibly even harmful in terms of the way that it shapes our understanding of those things. Because, all of the metaphors about trying something new, moving into something, they're like violent practically, Chris. It's like, oh, take the leap, take the plunge. These are metaphors that like
Yeah.
rational people are going to be like, oh, I don't know about that, right? And it's not that they're scaredy cats. It's
Yeah.
that they are rational people who are like, oh, wow, the idea of possibly flying versus possibly plummeting to my death, I'm not sure I like those odds. And so I really want to emphasize, for me, when I think about people moving in new directions or, trying the next thing, whatever the thing is in 10, 20 years that they want to do, I am not into taking leaps at all. I am into people not getting out over their skis and instead making a series of small bets so that they can learn more, understand more, get the terrain, and then they can saunter on dry land toward whatever they want to do.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Dorie Clark, who is a Duke and Columbia business professor, a Wall Street Journal bestselling author, and she's also ranked as a #1 communication coach and a top 50 business thinker in the world from Thinkers 50. During the episode, Dorie discusses her new book, The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. She also shares why your personal goals need a long-term strategy and how to rethink failure. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Dorie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Chris, I'm awesome. Good to speak with you.
Nice to see you again. I feel like I've been stalking you way too much on LinkedIn recently with all the amazing shows. You've literally, I thought I work hard, but I feel like I found someone that works harder than me.
I don't know about that, but thank you. I appreciate it.
How are things? How's everything going with the book at the moment?
It is really good. The book, my most recent book, The Long Game, came out about 14 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So as we were talking about before we got on air, my version of trying to walk the talk is that I have decided that it is going to be a 5-year endeavor for me to be promoting the book and just working hard. I think in the past for books, I worked really hard at the launch and then kind of burned myself out and moved on to something else. And so I am trying to play the long game for the long game, which is very meta, but I am staking the bet that is what is necessary to ensure its long-term success.
And I see that. So I didn't even realize it was that long ago, because whenever I'm following you, the content, the show you're doing on LinkedIn, you're always talking about it, you're living it, right? So it's always top of mind. So I didn't even realize it was that long ago that the book came out. So clearly it's working.
Yeah, well, thank you. There's a real, I think, internal pressure for most people. Certainly myself included, that when people ask you like, hey, what's up? You want to have like a new answer. You want to come up with some new thing, so it doesn't sound boring or like, oh, I already told you that. But I've really come to reflect on some of my early experiences. I used to work in politics. I was a press secretary on a presidential campaign years ago, and you'd be with a candidate. And literally their job, the people who were the most successful as candidates were the people who just had the internal fortitude to literally give the same speech or incredibly close, tight variations of it 6 to 8 times a day to different audiences.
Yeah.
And they were so bored of it. They were so bored of themselves. But the willingness to just do the work, lean into just like, all right, it might be old for me. It is not old for the people hearing it. That I think there's real character in that, and that's something that I'm aspiring toward.
Yeah, I really took that away from a lot of the members of the 100 coaches that we speak to, and I hear them say the same. To hear the top 3 things, and I've heard them say it a million times, like Marshall and Chester and others. And if I see them at a conference or on a podcast, or I hear them say it over and over again. And I realize the power of that, like you're saying, it's really powerful. And also to deliver it with the same passion, the same energy, the same enthusiasm as well. So I've been trying to package a lot of what we're learning from the show in the same way now, to your point. And I feel like it's really important. But tell everyone a little bit more about you. Obviously, I've given them a quick intro when they first joined in, but tell them a little bit more about you and your journey to where we are now.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'll give the Cliff Notes version, and we can go into more depth about anything that you want to. But broadly speaking, the things I do these days, I write books, I teach business school, I give speeches, and my path to that was a little bit unusual. I started my career as a journalist. I was a political journalist, and I got laid off rather quickly and ignominiously at the beginning of the downturn of journalism in 2001. And so I found my way into other professions. I became a press secretary on a governor's race in the United States, a presidential campaign. I consulted on a variety of other campaigns. Eventually, I got a job running a nonprofit for a couple of years. And then finally, in 2006, I decided that I would start my own business. And I've been working ever since then, sort of at the nexus of marketing and strategy and communications. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of led me down the path in an unusual way. I went to graduate school in theology. My undergraduate degree is in philosophy. So I try to take a humanistic approach to what I do, and take all those experiences, mash them up in a bag, and try to create some ideas and content that are useful to people.
Yeah, I love it. Just out of curiosity, like, what was the moment where you said to yourself, I'm going to go start my own company? Was there like an aha moment or a particular trigger? Just that interesting.
It was sort of an aha moment. I don't think it was necessarily literally one moment, but I had been running this nonprofit for about a year. And even though I had worked on presidential campaigns, which was a very high stress job, I bet. Literally would get calls in the middle of the night because of some breaking news. Running the nonprofit was actually existentially more stressful for me because it was a tiny organization. We had a board that was very nice, but pretty much did zero fundraising. And so the weight of this organization and its survival was on me as the executive director to figure it out. And I needed to provide for me. And, we had 2 other staffers. And it was just so high pressure to figure out, how do we get the money? Where do we get it? And at a certain point, I just had this revelation, which I feel like is a little bit different than a lot of people who enter coaching or consulting. Many of them are coming from, they have the opposite problem, right? They're coming from these very lucrative corporate jobs. Mm-hmm. They've got the golden handcuffs and they're like, oh, I want to work for myself, but gosh, it might be hard to figure out how to make $1 million on my own since I'm, making so much in the corporate world. In my case, I was making so little as an executive director of a nonprofit that I thought, literally, if all I do is donate blood every week, I can probably make more money. So why don't I give it a go?
Yeah, that's hilarious. You're so right about the two opposite sides as well. I love that. So tell everyone about the new book, The Long Game, how to be a long-term thinker in a short-term world. What's the inspiration behind that?
So I had been kicking around some of the ideas in The Long Game for several years. 2018, 2019, I was starting to think around this. I had been invited to give a talk at something called the Peter Drucker Forum, which is an annual conference in Austria, and sort of honoring the management thinker Peter Drucker. And they asked me to give a talk about strategy, and that was literally just the mandate, something about strategy. And I thought, wow, what
that's pretty broad. Yeah.
Where can I go with that? There's a lot of things that have been said about strategy, and I wanted to say something useful. So I was just, processing that. And eventually what I realized was, for me, the most interesting thing about strategy was everyone thinks it's a good idea. Everyone thinks strategic thinking is a good idea. And yet, so the problem is not the level of agreement. The problem is that people don't actually do it. It's sort of more like an exercise kind of thing, right? Oh yeah, it'd be great to go to the gym. So the question for me was, all right, well, how do we get people to that? If we all think it's a great idea, what is holding us back, and what could we do sort of structurally, for managers or leaders? What do we do structurally for other people to help them be more strategic? And then in our own lives, how can we sort of set up systems so that it is easier for us, so that we are more likely to actually do the thing that we know is so beneficial for us? And so I started playing around with that question, and that's really what led to the long game is, how can we just lower the bar and make it easier for ourselves to be the kind of long-term thinkers that we know would be a good idea for us.
Mm-hmm. Was there much out there around this specific topic when you started doing your researches out of interest?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of good stuff about strategy writ large, like at the organizational level, for sure. Rita McGrath, who you probably know, is
been on the show. Love
terrific,
her.
Terrific thinker about organizational strategy, and I love her stuff. But often where I go with my books, all of them have really been focused at the individual level and sort of answering the questions like, well, what can a person do? Not just an institution or an organization, but what can a person do to be more strategic or take a strategic approach in their life and in their career? And so I don't think that there actually was a ton written about that. I mean, there's lots of like career books, like, figure out what you want, but applying rigorously the lens of strategy and long-term thinking to it hadn't been done, or at least hadn't been done enough, I thought. And so I wanted to try to make a contribution there and write a book that would hopefully be interesting to people and useful to them.
So who's it for when you wrote it? Who did you have in mind?
I was intending the book to be for people who want to self-actualize. It's fairly broad in some sense, but it's actually fairly narrow in a psychographic sense, because frankly, a lot of people don't really care, or they're so enmeshed in the day-to-day that they're just like, whatever. But there is a subset of people who actually do care about the idea of, all right, the question I wanted to answer at a really fundamental level is, what are the things that you can do today that will make it more likely that 10, 20, 30 years from now, you will have the outcome in your life that you want? And I think everybody would like those outcomes.
100%.
But not everybody is willing to do the work. And the truth is, I mean, the sad truth, Chris, is that the work, if you start it now, if you have a long enough runway, is not that much. It's not that hard. And yet there are a lot of people who still won't do it. And so you have to be a person who at least theoretically is interested in that concept of how to do it and willing to make at least small changes to the things you do in your life or the way that you see the world. But if that is an appealing prospect, then the book is for those people.
Yeah. I feel like so many of us, and I'm definitely guilty of it, that can be caught up being in the business that you don't take a time to sit back and ask those questions.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that having a coach has helped me with. Chester is my coach, by the way. Chester.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, I'm very lucky. And that's something he's really helped me with. What are some examples for our audience of some of those steps? You mentioned some of those micro steps that you would take. What are some examples of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of it, frankly, is just getting clear. First of all, it's about getting clarity about what we actually want. And then, of course, it's the steps to get there. And each of those require different things. But, I think about, for instance, one of the concepts that I talk about in the long game is thinking in waves. And what I mean by that is that where we get in trouble is, for a lot of people, of course, we know this, it's like trying to do too many things all at the same time. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we know intellectually that doesn't work, but we actually don't really have a different approach that's better, because you feel like, well, all those things need to get done. So, what do I do? And one of the strategies that I advocate for with thinking in waves is understanding that, yes, it is true that all those things need to get done, but we actually should be thinking sequentially and understanding that at different points, we need to pick a particular type of activity to really over-index on, overemphasize. And and so I talk about different waves, like, one is, for instance, the creating wave, where we are putting ideas and content out there, for instance, and this is something you do a ton of, you do well. This is necessary. If you want to be known for your ideas, surprise, people need to know what your ideas are. And it doesn't mean you have to start a podcast, you could, but It just means, if you're an executive, it means things like speaking up more in meetings or volunteering to present at a conference or writing an article for your company newsletter, like whatever. There's a million things you can do, but being more publicly visible with your ideas. And that is a really important phase you need to do. But the other problem that a lot of people have is that they get comfortable doing one type of thing and then they just keep doing it forever. And so half the battle is understanding that you will also always be held back by the limitations that you have. And so understanding when it's time to shift to a new wave. So for instance, I often suggest that as we're shifting, so you do creating, but you also have to have the connecting wave. So everybody needs to have a pretty robust network. And if that has not been a priority heretofore, time to double down, because the scope of what you're able to do and who you're able to impact is always going to be limited if you don't actually know enough people.
Yeah. Well, both those two go hand in hand, right? I think the success of my show is come through my connections. And that then informs the creativity. I can't bring that to life without what they both work hand in hand. You can't have one without the other.
I think that's right. And particularly for podcasting, this is handy. The premise of podcasting is interviews.
Literally.
Right? So they really can. So I think depending on the modality that you're doing, they could be concurrent, they could be sequential. But I think that it's important for people to recognize that we get trapped sometimes with the thing that feels good. But if we keep doing it too much, as our friend Marshall Goldsmith says, right? What got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
Time to change the methods. I'm curious, for you, Chris, how do you think about strategy? You were mentioning that, working with a coach is helpful, but what are the practices that you have, or how does it factor into the way that you do business?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I'll be honest, when me and Shane started this company, we didn't have a business plan. We didn't have a strategy. And I'm just being honest, we were in a company where we were both very highly successful sales executives, and we were building this HR platform community, and we were frustrated in the direction the business was going. And we said, we can do this better. Let's go and start our own company. But we didn't sit down and create a business plan. We didn't sit down and here's our strategy. What we did, to answer your question, and what we continue to do, is constantly be in communication with our customers and our audience. And they define our strategy. Even to this day, like when I sit down and we're thinking about where we are and where we're going, and for example, we went from physical in-person events, which during the pandemic disappeared. Rather than me and Shane trying to guess what we should do, we sat down with our employees, we sat down with our key customers that we know and trust, and said, what do you want? How can we help? How can we best serve you? And then we build the strategy around that. And I thought that was very obvious and that everyone did that. And I realized later on that actually that's something that me and Shane is the reason we're still successful, and we continue to pivot and innovate. And the reason we're still here. So, we lost 90% of our revenue during the pandemic because we were in-person events. But because we took the time to sit down, speak to our customers and audience and our employees, and create a safe space in our business where our employees can come to us with ideas, we could build an effective strategy to pivot and innovate. It was kind of, you hear the innovate or die moment. We were in that moment where we were 3 months away from losing the company. But because we did that, that's where we are. So I wouldn't say we have a magic formula. It's just constantly listening, constantly being open to feedback, and never letting my ego get in the way, or my own opinions or thoughts get in the way, and just listen to my employees and my customers. I hope that answers your question.
Oh yeah, I think that's great. And I mean, honestly, I think actually that might be the formula, right? That a lot of people, I think erroneously, based on how it gets talked about culturally, imagine that, what strategy is that you somehow create a plan, you sit down, you write out a plan, and then for the next 5 to 10 years, you just meticulously check things off the list and just well, I'm following the plan. And of course, that's a terrible idea. That's one of the worst ideas.
We wouldn't be here.
Because circumstances change. And if you are not ready to shift into a different mode, if you are not ready to listen to market feedback the way that you are, things can go downhill really fast. So strict adherence to a plan that you're devising is actually one of the worst strategic decisions you can make.
Yeah. One of the questions that you talk about, which I was interested to hear your thoughts on, is, how do we create priorities with the future in mind? Because that's something I've always struggled with, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. So I hear from a lot of people, who are sort of hesitant to even engage in the idea of long-term thinking
Yeah.
or long-term planning, because they say, well, I don't know. I don't really know what I want. And, I wouldn't, or I know what I want, but I just have no idea how to get there. Like, it wouldn't be useful. And again, I think that there's this idea that somehow we need to be able to predict every one of the 10,000 steps from here to there, which I think, upon closer examination, you have to realize is like, no, like the whatever, the butterfly flaps his wings and all of it changes. What I am an advocate of is really understanding that the longer the time frame, the longer the horizon is that we're looking at, the great news, the actually incredibly liberating news in terms of being able to think big, quote unquote, is that all you need to know is what is the destination and then what is your next step in the moment.
Yes.
I think of it like driving in the fog. You don't have to know all the different things. You just have to know, all right, I want to break into the music industry. Well, okay, you have no idea how to do that. But is there one person who used to work at a record label, and could you invite them to lunch? Like, that's the next step.
Yeah.
So just, moving from one piece to another, I think is important. But if we're even before that, getting to the point of like, well, what do I even want? Like, where do I start that? I also want to encourage people, frankly, as we're talking about our lives, our careers, to sort of be less scientific than they might think. Again, people put so much pressure on themselves that they have to have the right answer, the perfect answer. I am a really big fan of provisional answers, provisional ideas. If you say, well, I think I want to do something, like whatever, like related to X. I think I want to do something with photography. Okay, you don't know necessarily what it is. That's fine. Just keep moving in that direction with classes you take, books you're reading, people you're talking to, conferences you attend. And as you do that, you will roughly be moving in that direction. And B, you'll have the ability to get a much more fine-grained understanding of, when I first started out, I just thought you could be a photographer and that was it. But now I understand that there's, 25 jobs in the photography world that, I could be a location scout. I could be, the director of, whatever, the fashion for the photo shoots. I mean, whatever it is. And it enables you to have a much more nuanced understanding of what the possibilities are and hyper target them as it becomes appropriate.
Yeah, I feel like that for me is like a superpower of not like one of my employees bought me a book many years ago, and it was called How to Be Good at Everything, as a joke, because the team would always be like, you're really annoying, you're good at everything. And my friends and family, I grew up playing ice hockey, skateboarding, breakdancing, you name it. I would kind of get to a level of mastery in a particular sport or activity, get bored, and then move on to the next. And I did the same thing in business. In each function, and I continue to do that. And I realized at a certain point that was my skill. It was understanding that I don't think about it. I just do. I just jump in. I take a step. I'm terrible at it. I keep taking more steps. And if anything, the interest just continues to build, and I get more and more excited about it. Sometimes it doesn't feel great. For example, if I haven't ran in 6 months and I start running, I know I'm going to feel terrible. But I know the next time I'm going to get better and better and better and better. And also at the same time, like you said, I will also try things and be like, actually, this isn't what I want to do. And this isn't what I thought it would be, but now I've tasted it. So whenever people ask me about those things, I'm like, just jump in, just taste it, see if you like it. Take that and take the step. The amount of times that me and Shane have come up with ideas or products and we have no idea what we're doing, but it's just a series of taking those small steps, like you're saying, that gets us where we are along the way. Yeah. And that's the point, because one of your chapters really is around rethinking failure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in so many cases when it comes to strategic thinking and what sort of what the success is that we are all collectively aspiring toward, the common narrative is actually not helpful and possibly even harmful in terms of the way that it shapes our understanding of those things. Because all of the metaphors about trying something new, moving into something, they're like violent practically, Chris. It's like, oh, take the leap, take the plunge. These are metaphors that like
Yeah,
rational people are going to be like, oh, I don't know about that, right? And it's not that they're scaredy cats. It's
yeah,
that they are rational people who are like, oh, wow, the idea of possibly flying versus possibly plummeting to my death. I'm not sure I like those odds. And so I really want to emphasize, for me, when I think about people moving in new directions or, trying the next thing, whatever the thing is in 10, 20 years that they
hmm
want to do, I am not into taking leaps at all. I am into people not getting out over their skis and instead making a series of small bets so that they can learn more, understand more, get the terrain, and then they can saunter on dry land toward whatever they want to do. And
hmm
just, one example of that is, most CHROs and HR professionals are going to be familiar with, Google and their famous, 20%
yeah,
time
yeah,
concept, which, of course, caveat, we know that the majority of Googlers do not do this. They do not take advantage of that because, frankly, it's hard. People are busy. They don't necessarily make that time. But in theory, Google encourages their employees to spend up to 20% of their time on discretionary activities, sort of experimental activities that might benefit the company down the road, that are separated from your day-to-day job description. I am a big believer that all of us should make every attempt in our own lives and careers to have our own 20% time.
yeah,
And if you can't have 20, fine. Have 10, have 5. But it's really important for all of us in terms of our long-term professional development and our ability to prepare ourselves for whatever we're moving toward, to just have this kind of sideline of new skills we're learning, new things that we're developing, because that's the thing, that if you are consistently applying 5 or 10 or 20% of your time over a period of years, you will develop enough contacts and connections and mastery that it enables you very, very easily and without trauma to transition into whatever else it is you want to be doing.
yeah. I'll give you a perfect example that you just brought to mind. When outside of the work we're doing with HR leaders, one of my passions was video editing, live stream production. And I was doing that through like gaming because I like playing games. And it was something. So when the pandemic hit and everyone had to go virtual, I already knew how to build a TV studio and live stream. I already knew how to edit. I already had the contacts in the space. So just because I was doing it as a passion, that was my 20. That was my 20%. And we pivoted within literally a few days and had everything in place, and we were live, up and running. And I was like, I never thought that would come in hand that quickly, right? As well. And similar with the podcast, after 10 years selling to HR executives and building my relationships, I started this podcast, and I was like, oh wow, I have this huge Rolodex of HR leaders and relationships. Let me create this show and this podcast. And I didn't really make the connection at the time. I didn't start it because I had the Rolodex. It just kind of came into play. And so many other examples, like you're saying, of things that I've done outside in my own personal life that have benefited in business, and vice versa, to be honest.
That's a fantastic example, Chris. I love that.
Yeah, we survived along the way. I'm trying to think, like, one of the things that I struggle with is trade-offs. I know there's something you also talk about, and me and Shane always sit down and like, how do we figure out how to make the right trade-offs? How do you approach that?
Yeah, certainly one of the challenges that everybody faces on a day-to-day basis is short-term versus long-term,
Yeah.
right? We've got, the list of to-dos, the meetings, the emails, all of the incessant things that you have to plow through. But it's also true that that you've got these longer term projects that require time and investment, and frankly, they're not going to help you today, but they will help the future you, a year or 2 or 3 years from now a lot. And so figuring out how to balance those things is not necessarily easy. But for me, one of the ways that I like to think about it is understanding what we are leveraging for, and trying to think through how we can maximize the value of the opportunities that are presented. And so, in the long game, for instance, I profile a guy named Phil Van Nostrand, who's a photographer that I know in New York. And I love his strategy because, for so many people, if you're a photographer, if you have whatever business, you just think about like, well, how can I make the most money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a bad thing to be thinking about if you're a business owner. But Phil, I think, did it the right way, or a smart way at least, because he said, well, what would be the point of my having money? Oh, the point is that I want to have a really interesting life, and I want to have a lot of cool experiences. That's what I would do with money. And so certainly he has corporate gigs where, he gets paid very handsomely for things, but he's also very strategically chosen to take on certain projects that either don't pay him a lot or don't pay him at all, because it enhances his lifestyle in the way that he really likes. And so, as one example, he has a friend who has a business, and is sort of like, an Instagram influencer, where she creates these very elaborate period costumes.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of times a year, she takes trips to exotic locations like Venice or Versailles or whatever, and does photo shoots of her and her friends in all of these period costumes that she's created. And so for Phil, she brings him along on the trip, and he's the photographer capturing it. And so he's not getting money for this, but he's getting to have travel to all the places he would want to go with his friends.
Yep.
And it's an incredible lifestyle enhancement. Or, he'll spend a morning sometimes. There's a cashmere scarf company, and, they're new, they don't have a lot of money, but these scarves cost $800 a piece. Phil is not going to buy an $800 scarf, but he'll shoot the scarves for them for a morning, and they'll give him a basket full of scarves. And he's got Christmas presents for everybody in his life that are just completely baller. So thinking through, what are the smart ways for all of us that we can, maximize for our lives, for our lifestyles? How do we really put the right things at the head of the line?
Yeah. I feel like I only started doing that more often when my daughter arrived, Robin, and I started thinking about things a bit differently in that sense, like you're saying. Like, one of the reasons I built the home studio is that I can spend more time with Robin, be more close to her, and be more intentional about how I spend my time and what that means as well. So yeah, so it's very important. I love the example that you shared. I feel like you mentioned strategic patience. Could you explain to everyone what you mean by that?
Yeah, this is a concept, Chris, that hits home for me, because my whole life I've never been fantastic about patience.
Me neither, which is why I'm asking about it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, if you're a person who wants to make things happen, you want to make it happen. And I think so often in the world, the people around us, the quote unquote authority figures, whether it's people when you're young or in companies, sometimes it's your bosses or whatever, they'll say, well, just be patient. And oftentimes what that is code for is, please shut up. Please stop asking about this. Just back off. And, I mean, no wonder people don't like it. It's kind of offensive, right? It's just like, sit down, shut up, stop complaining. Even if it's something that actually is a legitimately good idea, or actually is a really important thing that needs to happen. And so for reasons like that, I have gotten really allergic to patience in general. But the struggle that I have, you were asking earlier about, how do you balance things? And something that I've come to realize in writing a book about long-term thinking is that the truth is, there are some times when people are saying just be patient as a tool of placation, but it is also true that there legitimately are certain circumstances where you do have to be patient. This is sort of like the farmer growing the crops. And even if you really want the crops to grow in like a week, sorry, they take a few months. They don't take a week. And that's just literally how it is structurally. And I think for a lot of the best things in our careers, or in our lives, right? I mean, developing a relationship with your daughter, let's say, that is not something where it's like, oh, good, if I really go all in this week, I'm set for the next 30 years. Like no. And similarly, we have professional goals. Maybe it's writing a book. Maybe it's launching a really great new initiative at your company. Maybe it's clamoring your way into a really fantastic senior position in your company, or getting an outside board seat, or whatever it is you're trying to do. Those are things that do take legitimately time and patience. And I think that we have to be wise enough to recognize when those things are the case, because a common phenomenon in modern life is that a lot of people, frankly, they give it a try like once or twice 100%. Or whatever, and they just give up.
Yeah, it drives me crazy.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And so it's really important to recognize when something is a circumstance. Like, no, actually, legit, this takes time and effort, and we need to put it in. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. And so for me, strategic patience is about that kind of wisdom to know the difference. And it's also about understanding that it's not that you're sitting back and just waiting for things to happen during that time. You actually are doing things. If you're trying to get a board seat, let's say, I mean, yeah, depending where you are, maybe it's going to take you 5 years to get on a board. You've got to network, you've got to go through board trainings, you've got to be putting feelers out, you've got to be building your skills in certain areas so that you're an attractive candidate, whatever it is. It may literally take 5 years, but it's also true that you don't want to just wait to be tapped on the shoulder. You should be networking. You should be taking courses or whatever it is. Maybe being on a university board or something like that to prove your mettle. We don't have to be passive. We just have to be strategic.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is, like, from the outside in, people just assume it happened really quickly.
Yeah.
So they'll see that person's really good at something without seeing the thousands of hours that were put in. They'll see that leader in that position, like you said, without seeing all of that work that you just mentioned go in. And then they just want it now. And I also feel like we're living in a kind of in a world with social media and everything, where people just want everything right now, in the moment. We're even seeing it with new employees coming into the workplace, demanding more of their organizations and leaders, saying, we want it now. We're not waiting 2 years for a promotion. I want now, development now, everything now. And I see the podcast we spoke before. You asked me how long I'm doing the podcast. 6 years. 6 years and 600 episodes to get to the point where we are now. Whereas some people speak to me, they're like, oh, wow, Chris, you're doing really well. I can't believe how, I'm like, 6 years of doing the small things day in, day out, being consistent. Like, one of the things I always say to the team is do the basics to a high standard consistently. That's what will get us where we're going. But that's hard. Exactly right. Doing the basics to a high standard consistently is really hard. It's really, really hard. Day in, day out. Goodness. It's tough to do that. Yeah. No, I love that. I think patience is key with everything, Like, I learned that in sports, like learning to become good at sports. I remember I wanted to be a professional skateboarder at one point. And it must have taken me, there's this one trick I was trying to land, and it probably took me 1,000 attempts to land that one trick. But when I landed it, it meant all of the injuries and every time I fell over, all the things, it was all worth it, right? The patience. All my friends were like, we're going home, Chris. I'm like, no, I'm going to stay here for a couple more hours and just keep doing it. And then I kind of took that into the business world as well. Like, sales was a perfect example, right? If you haven't got patience, you ain't going to be great at sales, because for every yes that I got 100 no's. And that builds something inside of you. When you hear someone say, oh, I'm not good at that, and you say, how many times have you tried it? They say once. You're like, once? Yeah. I had a CHRO of a global brand that you all know and trust. I spoke to them last week, who now became a consultant after 20 years as a CHRO of a $1 billion company. and she called me complaining that that she had pitched 3 people and they said no. And I was just like, I laughed, and she was like, why are you laughing? I was like, only 3? Like, and she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you need to get back out there. Like, it's 3 people. It's not, it's not enough to tell you that it's a bad idea, as well. Yeah.
That's right. And so you're right, Chris. Sales is the perfect example, because it's also true, frankly, that if you get a yes right away, it often might even be a fake yes.
That's true.
It might be a spike out yes. Because if it's like goals, right? I mean, if your goal is like, oh, I'm gonna buy a pack of gum or something, like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
If your goal is like, I'm going to, launch this initiative in 14 countries, of course, that's gonna take so much time and effort, and we just have to recognize that that's baked into the process. If it happens quickly, I mean, yay, that's wonderful, that's a miracle. But 99% of the time it won't, and you have to do the work.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but I feel like that for me, it means more. Yes, I'm frustrated sometimes, and yes, it's hard, and we all, for everyone listening, it's tough to get that. But it's the journey that when I look back on, I enjoyed the most, and that's where I get the gratification. If anything, when I achieve the goal, I'm like, like, it's done, which is great, but I'm like, now what? As well. What's what you share so much great insights and value in the book, but what's kind of the one thing you really want people to take away from the book?
The one thing that I would want people to take away is that making the shift to being a strategic thinker is actually not that hard, in the sense that oftentimes people assume that what is required is the thing that they lack, which is time. They say, oh, if I had more time.
Is that the number one excuse that you hear, by the way?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because people have this idea that strategic thinking is like the thing you do on a retreat, that I need to go away for a week, or I need to go away for 6 months to the ashram. And I mean, yes, you certainly can do strategic thinking under those circumstances, but regular people in the course of regular life can be strategic. It's not about more time. It's about a different lens. And the lens is just making sure that on a regular basis, you are asking, what is the thing that I can do today that will make tomorrow better and easier? And if you keep systematically asking that question and doing those small things, it makes a big difference.
I love that. And do you encourage people to schedule that time in their diary, like literally be intentional about carving that time out?
I think that absolutely can help. It's sort of a reminder. I think over time, the gym metaphor really does hold. In the early days, as you're establishing the habit, it is sort of important to put guardrails on, like, okay, I'm going to hire the trainer because I don't want to stand up the trainer. And so you get in the habit of doing it. Over time, when you're used to it, it feels wrong if you don't go to the gym. Like, you don't need the trainer anymore because you're in the habit. You're like, God, I feel like I haven't moved all day. Yeah. You're going to do it yourself. And so it's not that you always need to be scheduling time, specific time for strategic thinking. It can become just the way you look at the world. But early on, it is useful to kind of give yourself, just a little bit of space. Not 10 hours, even a half an hour is useful.
I just love the idea, like you're saying, is whenever you're approaching it, just constantly asking that question. That alone is so powerful. That's the one thing I'm taking away from this that I want to share with my team as well, is just ask it. Even when we're meeting as a team, asking ourselves that question. I'm really excited generally to see what are the answers that the team come up with from that. What is that one thing that we can do today? It's so practical as well. Like we try and overthink this and think that we need all of these expensive solutions, and but really that question is very powerful as well. So tell everyone about your show, because I really want them to connect with you and follow the show as well.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Yes, I do a weekly live stream show for Newsweek. the weekly news magazine. It's every Thursday, noon Eastern in the U.S. It is usually, depending on the time zone,
Yeah.
5 p.m. in London. And folks can learn more and check it out. My website is dorieclark.com. You can sign up for a newsletter there, and you'll get reminders.
Yeah, and make sure you follow Dorie on LinkedIn, everyone. So the links are all below for the book, for any connections there. Last thing, what would be your parting advice for the audience, and then we'll say goodbye.
Oh, thank you, Chris. My parting advice is that when it comes to being a more strategic thinker, one of the concepts I talk about in the long game that I find most personally encouraging, I guess, is the idea of optimizing for interesting, which is, the truth is, I mean, yes, we recognize we have one life, we might as well make it count. Oftentimes we feel like we don't have choices in what we do. I think we have more choices than we might imagine, but even within narrow constraints, we often have some discretion. And my advice is that when we have a choice, we should choose what is most interesting, because it makes our lives better, it makes it more fun, and there's kind of no reason not to.
Yeah.
So, in a world where a lot of people optimize for money, or a lot of people optimize for status, I want to optimize for interesting. And I would like to make a movement for the most interesting life to be the one that we're aspiring toward.
I love that so much. I'm so happy that you said that at the end. Optimize for interesting. It's just like a lot of what you've been talking about is just like looking through these things through a different lens, right? And
Totally.
again, that's another great lens to look at this. Are we optimizing this for interesting? And I'm sure there's so many moments and opportunities that we can do that we miss for our employees and for ourselves personally. Well, listen,
Yes.
So excited about this. So excited to get the book into our audience's hands. I appreciate you coming on the show. Everyone, make sure you go definitely follow, like, comment, subscribe as well. And I look forward to following your work and carry on watching the show as well. You got a fan in me, and I wish you all the best until next week.
Chris, thank you. Great to talk to you.